Thank you. Good morning. So we're going to have a quick session, but a powerful, impactful session, I'm sure. It's an absolute pleasure for me to introduce you to Sunita Kohli first. It was a great, pleasant surprise for me that in India we give Padma Shri for architecture, design and architecture, and Sunita Kohli is a recipient of the one and only Padma Shri for design in architecture. Thank you for being here. She is a design interior architect and has also been a practitioner, and she's also been the chair of School of Planning and Architecture. I had to my right Mr. Ramesh Jagannathan, he's from NYU, and Ratnesh Kumar from Cambridge, and Dr. Nita Bali, and she is from the Goenka School. So I just want to kickstart this session with a little bit of prelude about AI and design thinking. We all know we talked about AI right from the beginning of this conference, I think. So design thinking powered by AI and machine learning. I'm not too sure how many of us know this information. I was surprised when I got to learn this. The impact of AI amongst different industries or different spheres is the maximum in the field of education, and particularly higher education, to the tune of 80%. I was like blown away when I got this data. So it's very, very relevant for our discussion here. And what are some of the roles and approaches that ignite design thinking? The one is being an opportunity seeker. Go to where the problem is, not necessarily to solve it, but to even find and define a problem. So that's the number one step. And then the number two is the experience architect role, which actually curates the problem. And rule breaker, don't think straight, always think out of the box. That kind of powers and fuels AI and design thinking. And actually do things, being a producer. And last but not the least, design thinkers are great storytellers, looks like. So I have a distinguished panel here, and I will start with a question to Sunita. In your role as a chairperson of the School of Planning and Architecture, what were some of the key things that you kind of explored and implemented in the school in your role?
Well, being a new school of architecture and planning that was established 6 or 7 years ago in Bhopal, I thought this was also an opportunity to look at the curriculum and to see where the gaps were, so to speak. Of course, one doesn't want to change the system or anything, but I think one thing that we did do was the introduction of history and the humanities, particularly literature, because whether you're studying to be an urban planner or an architect, everything tells a story, as you say. So I think these were important things. And I think the two very definite things that we championed, one was a conference that had 400 delegates from Southeast Asia, and this was on vernacular architects. And there were 190 vernacular architects who participated. Of course, we had two partners in it, and Bhopal, for anybody who's visited, will know that it's a city of extraordinary museums, one-of-a-type museums that exist. So that was that. We brought out a white paper and all that, so that we also followed it up. And the other thing that one championed was the writing of the history of architecture from an indigenous perspective. And so we had these workshops with very eminent minds, very scholarly minds, and which we put into a book. It's a slim book, but at least it's there, because I'm a great believer in the printed word, so that you have conferences, you have workshops, and they do not remain ephemeral, and however much one has enjoyed them or spoken at depth in them. So I think these were the initiatives, and one was that we took a 7th century site called Ashapuri, which has 27 fallen temples. And under a very able conservation architect, a professor in school, we had our conservation students, they have documented every single historical rock that is there. And what we call in conservation terms, stitched 3 temples. So of course it needs another grant, and since then I've not been chairperson, another grant, and then it needs a follow-up. And I think so much we have such an excess of archaeological and architectural riches in our country. This is one example, and this is what we did.
Thank you very much, Sunita. Ratnesh, you've kind of represent Cambridge. I mean, that's something everybody lives and breathes, right? Cambridge. So in your experience, what do you think design thinking can do to the different levels of education?
See, I would approach this a little different. I would approach it more from a perspective of school. And given the fact that yesterday we had a budget session, and there were discussion about the technology, and then there were discussion about school, the technology in terms of how fast are we moving on the data side, how fast are we moving in terms of our smartphone penetration. Last week I was in World Education Forum, and I think one of the discussion was actually we had a good debate on was the fact the way the knowledge economy such as India and other countries growing, what is the impact which has in the school space. So if you to imagine the technology helping this whole growth of knowledge economy, imagine this society as India, which used to have a system of joint families and the parents and the grandparents coming together having storytelling, which seems to be the new storytelling story about those whole design thinking curriculum which we talk about. But with the penetration of technology, one of the discussion was the large part of our own personal time is actually spending there on the technology. So if you imagine 0 to 4, where the children are growing, there normally used to be a lot of storytelling, a lot of technology happening, taking them away from the storytelling. So do we need to really ask the question, is the technology helping us in that spectrum? Move forward further, then you look at your primary and secondary education, and then you see whether the technology can actually help you to build some of those innate qualities like a good collaborator, good communicator, good critical thinker. And that just becomes, again, reversed is in terms of enabler, because you suddenly are connected to the world. There are various set of educator, and the learners across the world enabled, and the content of today actually available to you. So if you do design the school system, and if I have to, really put that design, because we come from Cambridge with that's where we've actually talked about pedagogy, curriculum, assessment. I think we need to start thinking from the early age that do we need to go back to the primary stage and start educating the parents and the educators there to enable them to tell those stories again, and then move them forward in their own medium of instruction of a language to the next stage of primary and secondary, where you could actually enable the technology to empower them with the whole ideas of collaboration, critical thinking, and communication. And therefore bring that as part of your design thinking is really what I think our curriculum would approach if it is to imagine an ideal curriculum in the school. And I think technology could be empowering, but also sometime it could be limiting if you're really getting away from the basic norm.
So that's a great point, Ratnesh, in terms of retaining the human element to the technology, right? I'm remembered a reminder of my grandmother, who taught all my dad and his siblings till class 4, because my grandfather was a freedom fighter. He was always in the jail. My grandmother couldn't afford to send her kids to school. So till grade 4, she actually taught them, so, and they're all doing great. And going to Ramesh, you've been a provost in the innovation, design thinking and innovation in NYU. How do you actually inculcate design thinking with your students?
I started to pay a special attention to design thinking as we, launched NYU Abu Dhabi in 2010. So I would give you a specific example as to how I put it in and built a course around it, which actually became one of the most popular courses on campus. I take a step back. My design thinking is, associated with technology once again. In my opinion, the aspect of design thinking has both function and form, right? What does it do, and how does it, how do you build it? What does it look like? And IDEO as a company in Silicon Valley actually pioneered or disrupted this field when the Apple computers came along. There is this Xerox PARC in Palo Alto when they came up with the mouse. So what I mean is that initially when PCs came along and then the Windows came along, how do humans interact with machines, right? The Macintosh and so on, right? So you have to sort of, the machine, the way we interact with machines have to be intuitive to us, right? So the graphical user interface and so on. So this aspect of how do you design this human-computer interaction actually pioneered the concept of design thinking, in my opinion, in the 80s and the 90s, right? So when I'll give you some specific example, in a rudimentary sense, if you're designing a toothbrush for a baby, like a 2-year-old, automatically one might think wrongly that, the babies have little small hands, so you might want to build very small, toothbrushes. But actually, babies don't hold with fingers, they hold with the entire palm, right? So you need to actually build a big toothbrush so they can actually grab it. Simple things like that, right? So there's a lot of examples like this. So when I was tasked with creating a course, which I felt was very important as computers became more and more embedded in the way we live, right? So I said that the students have to experience how to solve open-ended problems, right? It's not prescriptive. So I designed this course called Design and Innovation, in which these are freshman students, mainly for freshman students, and that they would be given a problem. The first course was, how do you communicate with a loved one over long distance, one emotion or an experience? That's the problem that they were given. It's a very open-ended problem, and they have to create an electronic device to do that, right? And these are high school students, so they have to learn coding, they have to learn circuits, they have to learn how to put the codes and circuits together and build electromechanical thingies and all that. They have to work in teams, but they also have to come up with a problem, the solution to the problem, very specific way, right? So they have to design this, and then when they have built this thing, when you give it to your loved one over a long distance, when they use it, they will experience the emotion you are trying to communicate. It's very simple, but the process of taking this very abstract thing about an emotion, right, and building an electronic product, you're out of high school, you don't even know what circuits are, you don't even know what code is, and you have to do it in teams, you have to come up with a solution yourself, and this is done in just 2 weeks. Right? It's a very, so they learn how to make decisions, they learn how to learn by themselves, teach themselves, right? How to work in teams and how to accept failures, how to make course corrections, and then build a product that actually works and present it to a large group of audience from the public. So that's, to me, is a practical way of introducing them to design something like that. I'll give you one example as to what came out of it. It's a long.
Sure.
So one group actually came up with a pen. One of the key problems that the students, freshman students especially, face is stress, right? When they go from home to a college setting, right? But they're very afraid to tell people that they're very stressed, right? Because they're embarrassed, right? So they built a pen with an MP3 player attached to it, and they did some research where, when you hold, there is a psychology study that, when you hold the pen, the amount of pressure, axial pen pressure, is an indicative of your emotional state of mind. So they actually divided the pressure into 3 parts. One is feeling good, getting stressed and really, really stressed, and it automatically will play the music that, they have loaded in the MP3 player to and then it is connected by wireless to their friends and their family, which will automatically play. So their family and friends would know how they feel, and they can actually reach out to them even without them. And they got a pattern, and this is a freshman. So that's an example. So the idea is that, we are not telling them how to do it, you just release them and they figure it out. I hope that's helpful to you.
Nita, you are in the whole gamut of a very privileged group which is still trying to figure out what they want to do and how they want to go about it, and you're in a very impactful role of guiding these young minds. What is the design thinking experience you have with these high school kids?
Thank you so much. To begin with, I would say that there is already a paradigm shift in education. Particularly from the perspective of a school educator, I feel that there seems to be a huge leap in terms of the learning style. I think the focus is no longer on rote learning. Rote learning is really being weeded out. And I am speaking from the perspective of somebody who heads a large international school where we transact the international curriculum. Of course, I will talk a little bit also about the national curriculum. But as I said, there is this huge shift. To begin with, definitely we are encouraging very young students to start challenging assumptions. Let me talk about students who are, let's say, very, very young, at the age 5 or 6. Particularly those who study the international curriculum. There is this concept of a UOI. A UOI is a unit of inquiry. I'm sure the term UOI is self-explanatory. When we say a unit of inquiry, very young students are pushed to ferret out information, to research on that information and derive their own conclusions. And I'm talking about very, very young children. So obviously what you are bringing into play are the ability to be able to look for relevant information using tools of technology, of course under a very careful supervision of adults, using tools of technology to ferret out information and then to be able to derive their own conclusions. So this starts really young. I am not talking about children, I'm not talking about the older children. The older children have moved to another level. Now let me talk about the older students and the curriculum that we teach, let's say to ages 16 to 18. We teach the IB diploma program. Inherent in the nature of the program or the Cambridge program that we run for grades 9 and 10, that's slightly younger children, inherent in that is the ability to ideate. The ability to be able to look at something as a challenge and then to devise the most appropriate solutions. Let me give an example of a subject which is taught to grades 11 and 12, something called the theory of knowledge, where students are pushed to look at an RLS. An RLS is a real life situation. You identify a real life situation which is provocative, which is open to discussion, which has an inherent problem, and then you look at a knowledge question which is related to the RLS. And then you dwell on how to resolve it in the most innovative manner. Not merely that, let's say, there is also this concept of something called an extended essay. Students who are between the ages 15 to 18 are supposed to write a dissertation of about 4,000 words on a topic of their choice, which is related to one of the disciplines that they are studying. And they are supposed to do extended research on that and delve into all aspects and then evolve solutions. So to my mind, I think the school education has really undergone a change, not just in the international curriculum. I think it is now percolating also to the national curriculum, where rote learning is really being weeded out, because all educators across the board are not just talking about the private schools, I'm also talking about the state-run schools, where teachers are being encouraged to use PBL, that's project-based learning. they are being pushed to work on blended learning modules. And I'm sure I'm sure Ratnesh, you're aware that Cambridge, in fact, has recently introduced the concept of blended learning. So it is happening not merely for those who are privileged and elite and have access to the international curricula. It is also happening, I think, at all levels, particularly in school education. And as Ramesh very rightly said, I'm sure, after at higher education also, this kind of innovation is happening. And the government of India, I'm sure, is placing a high premium on innovation in education. So I think there is this paradigm shift at all levels as a school educator.
Thank you so much, Nita. I think you talked absolutely, you were bingo on this whole 70-20-10 principle that we talk about in human development, whereas 10% is formal learning, 20% is by mentoring, coaching, and 70% is on-the-job learning. So I'm so glad that we are incorporating that even at the school level. Great panel, great thoughts. While we were talking about this, I was just remembering a recent experience of mine where I had the golden opportunity to be a panelist for a bunch of street entrepreneurs who came up with a lot of AI, design thinking, kind of innovative products. And one of the products was all the judges in the panel, we literally had tears in our eyes when the person introduced the product, which was basically coming out of a chip technology, but the innovation and the design thinking. And I was just going through the 5 different triggers for design thinking. One is seeking opportunity and find a problem. And this person actually found a problem. And what was the problem? The quality of life of someone who's brain dead and lying on the bed on full medical support devices. And what is the quality of life of that person, and what can we do to make it better? And a very simple thing that they tried to address was basically their, the natural hygiene things related to it, like when they want to go to the bathroom. Or when they want to drink water, there's no way they are able to indicate. And this chip technology actually is coded, and the moment the brain is thinking of the patient that I think I want to go to the bathroom, it just says code 1, and then it sends the code to the person who's attending, and they're able to attend to the patient. So on and so forth. That's kind of the basic research. And then experience of architect, like curate the problem into a solution. They did that and literally broke rules. If you think about these kind of medical interventions, it's always being thought about as someone in the field of medicine has to do it. This is a coder, a technology, a guy fresh out of college actually did this, nothing to do with medical field. It was amazing how they broke the rules and actually made the device, took it to a bunch of doctors who validated this. And the most important thing was the storytelling, how they talked about this as a solution for multiple problems that existed in the society.
On that note, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for the wonderful panel on architecting the minds of the future.